Johannes Brams was not a university man. He never attended university. But in 1879, when he was 46, he was offered a doctorate in philosophy from the University of Breslau. He accepted. He was anxious to be acknowledged in that academic way. But part of the deal was he had to write a piece. In the 19th century, when people were given honorary degrees, they had to do something. Nowadays, you get an honorary degree, it's usually because you have done things. You have accomplished a certain amount, you have a certain fame, and they say, we'd like to honor you by giving you a degree. It's rare that anyone asks you to do anything. When Richard Strauss was given an honorary degree, he was required to write a piece, and he wrote a piece called Taliaferre. It's a remarkable piece, but the thing about the piece is it takes 20 minutes, but it calls for 200 people to be on this stage, huge brass, a tenor solo, a huge chorus. I mean, what he did was he just took every possible person he could find in Heidelberg and put them on the stage for his to get his honorary degree. Brahms did something, I mean, not similar, but in a way, his largest orchestra, 3 trumpets, not 2 trumpets. Now, that's, I think, the only time he ever used 3 trumpets. Of course, normal 3 trombones, tuba. He used a piccolo and a contrabassoon, which he did quite often, and percussion. Brahms described it as a cheerful potpourri of student songs a la Suppe. That refers to Franz von Suppe, who was a wonderful composer of operettas and overtures. In fact, he uses 4 student songs as the basis for the whole work. The Academic Festival Overture begins in a very subtle, quiet way. And what's interesting to me, of course, is that not only are the strings playing, but you have the percussion joined in right away. How unusual. I'm trying to remember if I can think of an example in Brahms, or any composer of that period, where they begin a piece using the percussion right at the beginning like that. And it adds a certain air of expectation. When the woodwinds come in, there is a certain dark hue, a dark color, again, of expectation. Where is this leading? Finally, we get the first chorale tune, played by the violas, and then that melody extended by the horn. This leads back to the initial material again, and all of a sudden it builds and it becomes exuberant. So finally you have something that it's loud and exciting, and then immediately he brings you back to this ambiguous pianissimo. The woodwinds playing something very simple, and the strings playing a little bit late every time. They're never together. I mean, when you hear music where no one's ever together, you either think that they're making a mistake and they just can't play together, or what's going on here? Beethoven did it numerous times, but here Brahms does it, and it gives you this feeling of what's going to happen next. And then finally we get the second school tune played by a brass chorale of horns and trumpets. This brass chorale leads to another wonderful climactic moment. Repeat what we heard at the beginning, and then the violins come in with another beautiful tune. And again, it's, I don't know, in some ways this is like all the great Brahms done in 10 minutes, because it has this beautiful tune reminiscent a little bit of the Fourth Symphony, and then the woodwinds answer it. And then it expands and it becomes luscious, and it has beautiful harmonies and suspensions. It's just absolutely exquisite. It is reminiscent of so much of Brahms. Remember, he was now in his mid-40s. By then, he, yes, hadn't written all those symphonies, but he had the ability to do it, and you can see it all here. Finally, you get the jovial theme. Now, this is the third of the school themes played by the two bassoons. What's also interesting about this is that the violas and cellos are accompanying the two bassoons, but never on the beat. You'll hear the bassoons, da, 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 dum, bum, da, 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 and the viola and cello go, ba, 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 ba. It just makes it a little funnier. And then when finally the violins and violas come in, they're playing again pizzicato. It's incredible imagination of this composer. What to do? You have a simple tune. How to make it interesting? How to make it fascinating? And then, all of a sudden, an explosion, and the violins are in, and the same tune is played forte, loudly, and little variety, big third horn solo of triplets. Oh, it's just marvelous. Eventually, the same jovial tune is played by the brass as a real brass fanfare, while the strings now are playing those offbeats, but they're playing them aggressively and loudly. This leads eventually to the recapitulation of all the early material, and then finally the great melody, the great tune of all, the Garayamos Igatur, and played by the brass. And when we listen to this, pay special attention to the wonderful string writing, because here when the brass and the woodwinds and everything are playing this great melody, the violins and violas are playing fast notes furiously with what we call syncopation. So they're not on the beat, but rather it gives the feeling of being slightly off and then when those syncopations resolve to being on the beat, it gives you a feeling of having arrived. Then he switches and has the violins play the melody and the cello bass play the accompaniment, and you have a famous triangle, solo, percussion, the brass, and it ends in a very, very exciting way. In 10 minutes, you get a lot of what Brahms is and who Brahms is. Of course, he always underplayed the importance and the grandeur of his music. But this one is among the most beautiful, among the most charming, and very optimistically moving pieces in all of Brahms. An overture that these days is rarely played, and yet for me it's a great, great gesture by one of the great geniuses.